Do you remember that moment when as a child you wanted to say something, but you stopped yourself? That moment when you felt a lump in your throat and the words disappeared. I remember. I remember the silence that followed after my father said, "It will be as I say." Silence that swallowed my thoughts, my desires, my existence. Today we'll talk about words that can shape entire lives. About sentences that toxic fathers use like weapons, leaving scars that aren't visible to the naked eye, but which their children carry for their entire lives. These words aren't just sounds, they are foundations on which we build our image of ourselves, of the world, of love. If you've ever heard, "Why can't you be like your brother?" or "See how I feel now because of you," this video is for you. For us. For all who are trying to understand why certain words still echo in our heads, even when we're grown up. And for those who want to break that cycle, so they don't repeat those same words to their children. Welcome to the world of toxic parenting, and how to recognize it, understand it, and finally, overcome it. Before we dive into specific sentences and their consequences, it's important to understand, what does it actually mean to be a toxic parent? Especially, what does it mean to be a toxic father? According to numerous studies in developmental psychology, toxic parenting represents a pattern of behavior that undermines the self-confidence, emotional development, and independence of a child. A toxic father is, according to the definition from the portals Parenting for the Brain, primarily preoccupied with himself. He places his worth above the worth of other family members, including his children. Interestingly, children rarely recognize the toxicity of their parents until they reach adulthood or even later. This is because as children we don't have a reference point, we believe that what we experience at home is normal. It's our reality, the only one we know. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that's exactly what we'll do today, examine the darkness of toxic patterns in order to reach consciousness and, ultimately, healing. Sentence 1, "It will be as I say." The first sentence that almost every toxic father says to his children is simple, but powerful: "It will be as I say." When I first truly heard this sentence, not just with my ears, but with my heart, I was 10 years old. I wanted to play soccer instead of piano. My father looked over his newspaper and said, "It will be as I say." That was the end of the discussion. There was no explanation, no compromise, no dialogue. What does this sentence actually communicate? On the surface, it represents an authoritative stance for parents setting boundaries. And boundaries are healthy, boundaries are necessary. But the way boundaries are set determines whether they'll be healthy or harmful. According to child psychologist Chaim Ginit, authority without explanation creates rebellion or submission. Neither is healthy for a child's development. Healthy boundaries include explanations, dialogue, and respect for the child's perspective, even when we don't agree with it. A toxic father who insists that it will be as he says is actually communicating several things. First, that the child's opinion isn't important. This undermines the child's sense of autonomy and self-confidence. Second, that power and control take precedence over communication and understanding. Third, that love is conditional on obedience. To love means to listen without question. Research in developmental psychology shows that children who grow up with such authoritarian parents often develop one of two behavioral patterns. They either become overly obedient, losing touch with their own desires and needs, or they develop a defensive mechanism of resistance to authority, which can lead to problems at school and later in the workplace. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas spoke about the ethics of the face, the idea that when we truly see the face of another, we recognize their humanity and our responsibility toward them. Toxic parents often don't see the faces of their children, they don't recognize them as separate beings with their own integrity and dignity. Sentence 2, "See how I feel now because of you." See how I feel now because of you. This sentence is perhaps less obvious, but equally, if not more harmful than the first. I remember when I accidentally broke a vase, a gift my father had received from his father. "See how I feel now because of you," he said, as his eyes darkened with disappointment. I hadn't just broken a vase, I felt like I had broken something in him. This sentence is a classic example of emotional manipulation. In a healthy parent-child relationship, the parent takes responsibility for their own emotions. Yes, children can do things that upset us, but how we react to those emotions is our responsibility, not theirs. Psychologist Alice Miller, in her book The Drama of the Gifted Child, describes how parents who emotionally manipulate their children are actually using children to satisfy their own emotional needs. The child becomes responsible for the parent's happiness, which is a burden no child should carry. When a father says, "See how I feel now because of you," he transfers responsibility for his emotions to the child. This creates feelings of guilt and shame that can follow a person throughout their life. Many adults who grew up with toxic parents still struggle with an excessive sense of responsibility for others' emotions, which can lead to codependent relationships in adulthood. A study published in the Journal of Family Psychology showed that parental emotional manipulation correlates with anxiety and depression in children, as well as difficulties in forming healthy relationships in adulthood. Philosopher Martin Buber spoke about the difference between I-thou and I-it relationships. In an I-thou relationship, the other is seen as a subject, as a person with their own integrity. In an I-it relationship, the other is an object that we use for our own purposes. Toxic parents often treat their children as it, as a means to achieve their own goals or satisfy their own emotional needs. Sentence 3. Why can't you be like him or her? Why can't you be like your brother? Look how successful Mark's daughter is. If only you were as worthy as our neighbor's daughter. These sentences, with small variations, are part of the repertoire of almost every toxic father. Comparison is a powerful weapon that can leave deep scars on a child's psyche. When I was 12, I got a B in math. My father looked at the grade and said, "Why can't you be like Mark? He always gets an A." That sentence followed me throughout my education. Every time I picked up a pencil, I heard that voice, that question. What do we communicate to a child when we compare them to others? We communicate that they, as they are not good enough. That their worth is not inherent, but depends on their ability to surpass others or to be similar to them. Psychologist Alfred Adler, one of the pioneers of child psychology, emphasized the importance of recognizing the uniqueness of each child. According to Adler, comparing children can lead to the development of an inferiority complex, a deep sense of inadequacy that can shape an entire life. Research shows that children who are often compared to others have lower self-esteem, a higher risk of developing anxiety and depression, and difficulties in forming their own identity. French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote about the concept of otherness, the idea that identity is often formed in opposition to the other. When toxic fathers constantly compare their children to others, they create a dynamic in which the child internalizes the idea that they are other, less worthy, less capable, less loved. Sentence 4. You are such a, you will never. You are so stupid. You are lazy, just like your mother. You will never amount to anything. You will never succeed in life. These sentences, which we call labeling or limiting beliefs, are among the most harmful that toxic fathers can utter. They don't describe behavior that can be changed, they define an identity that, implicitly, cannot be changed. When a child hears, "You are lazy," they don't hear criticism of specific behavior. They hear a definition of their being. Laziness is part of your identity. And since children believe their parents, they internalize these labels and begin to live according to them. Psychologist Carl Rogers, founder of humanistic psychology, spoke about the concept of unconditional positive regard as the foundation of healthy development. Children need to feel that they are loved and valued as they are, regardless of their actions or achievements. Neuroscientific research shows that a child's brain is physically shaped by the words they hear. Repeating negative labels can create neural pathways that support these beliefs, making them truths for the person who has internalized them. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." When toxic parents limit the language with which they describe their children to negative labels, they literally limit the world of possibilities that these children can imagine for themselves. Sentence 5. I'm doing this for your own good. I'm doing this for your own good. One day you'll thank me. This hurts me more than it hurts you. These sentences often accompany punishment, control, or other forms of toxic behavior. They represent an attempt to justify actions that are often motivated by the parent's own needs, insecurities, or traumas. At 20, I decided to study art instead of law. My father was furious. "I forbid you," he said. "I'm doing this for your own good. One day you'll thank me." The phrase "for your own good" can be particularly confusing for a child, because it creates cognitive dissonance. If he loves me and wants what's best for me, why do I feel so bad? This dissonance can lead to distrust of one's own emotions and intuition. Psychoanalyst Alice Miller, whom we've already mentioned, describes how parents often project their own unresolved traumas and needs onto their children under the guise of the child's welfare. She calls this black pedagogy, the idea that children must be broken to become obedient. Research shows that children who grow up with parents who justify their control and punishment as for the child's good often internalize the message that love is associated with control and pain. This can lead to difficulties in recognizing healthy and unhealthy relationships in adulthood. French philosopher Michel Foucault wrote about the connection between knowledge, power, and control. Toxic parents often use their superior wisdom, "I know what's best for you," as justification for control, creating a power dynamic that serves their needs, not the child's needs. Sentence 6. While you're under my roof, you'll respect my rules. While you're under my roof, you'll respect my rules. I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it. As long as I feed you, you'll do as I say. These sentences are direct manifestations of an authoritarian approach to parenting based on control and obedience, rather than collaboration and respect. They create a power dynamic in which the child is subordinate and the parent is superior, with no room for dialogue or negotiation. At 15, I started getting interested in music that wasn't to my father's liking. When I turned up the volume in my room, he came in and said, "While you're under my roof, you'll respect my rules. You'll turn that down or I'll take away your speakers." These sentences communicate several problematic messages. First, they equate love and support with control. I feed you, therefore I have the right to control you. This incorrectly teaches children that love is transactional and conditional. Second, they undermine the child's sense of autonomy and privacy, treating the child's space and interests as the property of the parent. Third, they teach that authority comes exclusively from a position of power, not from wisdom, experience, or caring. Diana Baumrind, a developmental psychologist known for her work on parenting styles, identified the authoritarian style of parenting as one that emphasizes obedience and control at the expense of warmth and autonomy. Her research showed that children of authoritarian parents often have difficulties with self-regulation and making independent decisions. Anthropological research shows that different cultures have very different approaches to children's autonomy and decision-making. Many traditional cultures, such as certain indigenous communities, give children significant autonomy from an early age, while simultaneously expecting contributions to the community. This shows that strict hierarchical control is neither universal nor necessary for a child's healthy development. Philosopher John Stuart Mill in his work on liberties speaks about the tyranny of the majority, the idea that society can impose its will on an individual in ways that limit their freedom and authentic development. Toxic fathers often serve as microcosms of this dynamic, imposing their will and worldview on the child, with no room for diversity or individuality. Sentence 7. Others have it worse than you, you don't know what suffering is. Others have it worse than you. When I was a child, I walked 10 miles to school. You don't know what suffering is. Stop whining, some people don't even have bread. These sentences represent diminishment and invalidation of the child's feelings and experiences. They carry the message that the child's suffering isn't big enough to deserve attention or empathy. When as a child I was sad because of an argument with a friend, my father said, "Others have nothing to eat, and you're crying over such nonsense." In that moment, I learned that my feelings weren't important, that they weren't big enough to deserve space. What do these sentences actually do to a child's emotional development? First, they teach the child to suppress and hide their emotions, especially the negative ones like sadness, fear, or anger. Second, they create feelings of guilt for experiencing emotions, which can lead to chronic shame and low self-esteem. Third, they teach a false dichotomy: either your suffering is the greatest in the world, or it doesn't deserve to be acknowledged. This is logically flawed. We can simultaneously acknowledge our own pain and be aware of others' suffering. Brené Brown, a researcher who studies vulnerability and empathy, points out that comparative diminishment of others' suffering, at least it's not, is actually an act that blocks empathy. She explains that pain deserves compassion without the need for ranking or comparison. Studies on emotional intelligence show that the ability to recognize, name, and accept one's own emotions is crucial for mental health and healthy relationships. When parents invalidate their children's emotions, they deprive them of opportunities to develop this key skill. Psychologist John Gottman, known for his work with couples and families, speaks about the concept of emotion coaching, a process in which parents help children recognize and manage their emotions. He found that children of parents who validate and help them understand their emotions, instead of diminishing or punishing them, show better social skills, academic success, and emotional health. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, whom we've already mentioned, emphasized that the ethical relationship toward another is founded on recognizing their suffering, not on comparing or ranking suffering, but on the pure acknowledgement that the other suffers and that this suffering demands a response. Sentence 8. When will you finally change? When will you finally change? You'll never grow up. Always the same with you. These sentences carry a powerful implicit message: you're not good enough as you are, and your character is fundamentally flawed. They emphasize unchangeability and hopelessness: always, never, finally, instead of growth and possibility. A 17-year-old who comes home late after hanging out with friends might hear, "Always the same with you, you'll never change." This sentence doesn't just speak about one instance of being late, it defines character. Clinical psychologist Dr. Shefali Sabri, author of The Conscious Parent, speaks about the concept of egocentric parenting, parenting that is more focused on the parent's needs and expectations than on the actual person the child is. When a parent insists that a child change, they are often actually asking for the child to better satisfy the parent's needs and expectations. What a toxic father often doesn't see is that change doesn't happen through criticism and shame, but through acceptance and support. Psychologist Rollo May wrote, "The irony of human development is that we can only change when we accept ourselves as we are." Neurobiological research on adolescent brain development shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and long-term planning, is in the process of development until the early 20s. When toxic fathers criticize teenagers for immaturity or irresponsibility, they are actually criticizing a normal developmental process. Toxic fathers often don't understand or accept the concept of temperament, innate tendencies and predispositions that influence how we react to the world. Some people are naturally more introverted, some more sensitive, some more energetic. These differences are not flaws that need to be fixed, but diversities that need to be understood and accepted. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the concept of amor fati, love of one's fate, accepting oneself completely, including what we might see as flaws or weaknesses. This doesn't mean giving up on growth, but understanding that true growth comes from acceptance, not from rejection of oneself. Psychological consequences of growing up with a toxic father. What are the long-term consequences of growing up with a father who uses these and similar sentences? Research shows that the consequences are numerous and can affect almost all aspects of life. First, self-confidence and self-esteem. Children of toxic fathers often develop a deeply rooted feeling that they are not good enough, that they are fundamentally flawed. This can lead to self-sabotaging behaviors and difficulties in setting and achieving goals. Second, emotional regulation. When parents don't recognize and validate their children's emotions, these children may have difficulties recognizing and managing their own emotions in adulthood. This can lead to chronic anxiety, depression, or emotional suppression. Third, boundaries and relationships. Children who grow up with toxic fathers often have difficulties setting healthy boundaries in relationships. They may develop patterns of seeking approval and validation, sacrificing their own needs for the needs of others, or they may develop overly rigid boundaries out of fear of intimacy. Fourth, self-realization. Internalized criticism and limiting beliefs can prevent a person from following their true passions and talents, leading to a life filled with shoulds instead of wants. Fifth, physical health. More and more research shows that early stress and trauma can affect physical health through various mechanisms, including chronic inflammation and changes in immune system functioning. Longitudinal studies, such as the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences, show a strong correlation between negative childhood experiences, including emotional abuse, and later health problems, including cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and even certain types of cancer. Sixth, intergenerational transmission. Perhaps the most devastating consequence of toxic parenting is the tendency for these patterns to be passed from generation to generation. People who grew up with toxic fathers may unconsciously adopt the same patterns of behavior toward their children, perpetuating the cycle of trauma. Seventh, identity disorder and dissociation. When a child's authentic emotions, needs, and expression are constantly invalidated, dissociation from one's own experience can occur. The child may develop a false self, an external identity created to meet the expectations of parents, while the true self is suppressed. Psychiatrist R.D. Laing wrote about the concept of the divided self, the idea that in conditions where others don't see and recognize us as we truly are, we can develop a division between inner and outer identity. This division can lead to feelings of emptiness, worthlessness, and dissociation. Eighth, attachment disorders. According to John Bowlby, founder of attachment theory, early relationships with primary caregivers shape our internal working models, mental schemas about how relationships work and what we can expect from others. Children of toxic fathers often develop insecure attachment patterns that can affect all later relationships. Ninth, the cycle of violence. Research shows that children who witness or experience violence, including emotional violence, are more likely to be perpetrators or victims of violence in adulthood. This doesn't mean such an outcome is inevitable, many break the cycle, but the risk is statistically significant. The renowned psychiatrist and traumatologist Bessel van der Kolk in his book The Body Keeps the Score describes how trauma, including that caused by toxic parents, remains written in the body, manifesting through various physical symptoms and diseases. The path to healing. If you recognize these patterns from your childhood, it's important to know there is a path to healing. It's not an easy path, nor a quick one, but it is possible. The first step is recognition. Calling things by their real names. If you grew up with a toxic father, it's important to recognize these patterns and their impact on your life. This isn't about blaming parents, but about understanding how the past shapes the present. The second step is validation. Your pain is real. Your experience is real. You don't have to minimize or justify it. Many who grew up with toxic parents have a deeply rooted feeling that their experiences are exaggerated or not that bad. This is internalized invalidation that it's important to recognize and reject. The third step is grief. Yes, grief. We must grieve for the childhood we didn't have, for the support we didn't receive, for the injuries that were inflicted on us. This grief is natural and necessary, it's part of the healing process. Psychologist Francis Weller speaks about the work of grief as necessary for healing trauma and loss. The fourth step is work on oneself. This can include therapy, self-help, group support, or a combination of different approaches. The goal is to recognize and transform patterns that no longer serve your well-being. Modern therapeutic approaches such as EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic experiencing, and cognitive behavioral therapy have shown significant effectiveness in treating developmental trauma. The fifth step is setting boundaries. Many adults who grew up with toxic fathers have a complex relationship with boundaries, either they don't set them, or they set them overly rigidly. Learning to set healthy, flexible boundaries is crucial for healing. This may include boundaries with toxic parents in the present. The sixth step is parenting oneself again. This concept, which comes from transactional analysis, refers to the process in which we learn to be parents to ourselves in ways that were denied to us in childhood. This includes developing an inner voice that is supportive, kind, and encouraging, instead of critical and judgmental. The seventh step is developing authenticity. Many who grew up with toxic parents developed a false self, an external identity designed to meet others' expectations. The path to healing includes reconnecting with authentic desires, needs, and feelings. The 8th step is building community. Trauma isolates, and healing comes through connection. Finding people who can provide safety, understanding, and support is crucial for breaking the isolation that trauma often creates. The 9th step is bodily work. Since trauma remains written in the body, many find that body-oriented practices, such as yoga, tai chi, dance, or somatic experiencing therapy, are necessary for complete healing. The 10th step, for those who have become parents, is breaking the cycle, consciously choosing a different path, different words, a different way of showing love. This can be challenging because in moments of stress we often default to patterns we saw in childhood. But with practice, awareness, and support, it's possible to create new, healthier patterns for the next generation. As psychologist Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Our past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. How to break the cycle, becoming a better parent. If you're a parent or planning to become one, you're probably worried that you might unconsciously repeat your father's patterns. This concern is natural and even healthy. It shows your awareness and desire to be better. Research shows that awareness and intention play a key role in breaking the cycle of toxic parenting. The very fact that you recognize these patterns and want to change them significantly increases your chances of succeeding in that. But how specifically do you break the cycle? How do you become a parent who connects, not controls? Who supports, not diminishes? Who sees, not projects? First, work on your own healing. Unresolved trauma and pain can spill over into our parenting, even when we have the best intentions. The more you understand and integrate your own experiences, the more capable you'll be of being present for your children. Second, educate yourself about child development. Understanding what is developmentally appropriate for your child at a certain age can help you set realistic expectations and avoid frustration. Third, develop a practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness allows us to recognize when we're reacting from a place of trauma or old habit, instead of from conscious choice. Mindfulness meditation, journaling, or even just a practice of deep breathing can help us be more present in moments when we feel triggered. Fourth, surround yourself with support. Parenting is challenging even in the best circumstances, and even more so when we're trying to break the cycle of trauma. Support, whether through friends, groups, therapy, or mentorship, is key to success. Fifth, be gentle with yourself. No one is a perfect parent. We all make mistakes. The key difference between a healthy and a toxic parent isn't in the lack of mistakes, but in how we handle mistakes when they happen. Healthy parents recognize their mistakes, take responsibility for them, apologize when necessary, and work on change. They don't use shame or guilt as tools of discipline, neither for themselves nor for their children. Sixth, remember that the goal of parenting is to support the child in developing their authentic self, not to shape them according to your own image or satisfy your own unresolved needs. This requires constant practice of separating your own projections, expectations, and desires from the real person who is your child. Seventh, practice speaking different words. Instead of "it will be as I say," try "I'm interested in what you think." Instead of "see how I feel now because of you," try "how I feel frustrated." "I need a moment to collect myself." Instead of "why can't you be like him or her," try "I see you and appreciate you exactly as you are." Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, authors of The Whole Brain Child, speak about the concept of connect and redirect, the idea that, even when we need to discipline or set boundaries, we do it in a way that maintains emotional connection with the child. This is in contrast to the obedience at all costs approach that is common among toxic fathers. The role of society and culture in toxic fatherhood. Toxic fatherhood doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is shaped and supported by broader social and cultural expectations and norms. To fully understand and address the problem, we need to look at the broader context. Many cultures still nurture the concept of patriarchal authority, the idea that the father is the unquestionable head of the family whose word is not questioned. As society evolves toward greater equality, many men still receive messages that their worth as fathers is tied to their ability to maintain control over their family. Movies, television, and popular media often romanticize or normalize toxic patterns. How many times have we seen a scene where the father says, "While you're under my roof," as a moment of authority that is presented as normal and even positive? How many fathers on screen diminish their children's emotions or compare them to others, without any consequences or questioning? Sociologist Dr. Michael Kimmel, who researches masculinity, points out that many toxic patterns are actually an expression of a crisis of masculinity, men's insecurity about their role in a changing world. When fathers don't have healthy models for expressing their masculinity and fatherhood, they often resort to control and domination as familiar, socially supported patterns. Economic factors also play a role. Fathers who work long hours, have multiple jobs, or face financial insecurity may be under significant stress that spills over into their relationships with children. This doesn't justify toxic behavior, but it helps us understand some of the structural factors that contribute to it. Cultural differences in parenting practices are also important to understand. What is considered overly authoritative in one culture may be considered necessary for proper upbringing in another. However, research shows that regardless of cultural context, children thrive best when they feel loved, safe, and respected, even within stricter frameworks. The change in social norms around fatherhood is already underway. More and more men are actively seeking different models of fatherhood, more connected, emotionally available, supportive. They recognize that authority need not mean authoritarianism, that setting boundaries need not include humiliation, and that strength does not exclude tenderness. As a society, we need to continue this conversation, re-examine and redefine what it means to be a good father, and provide men with the tools, support, and examples needed to break toxic patterns. Powerful alternatives to toxic sentences. Now that we've identified toxic sentences and understood their impact, it's important to consider what instead. What are the alternatives that build, not destroy? That connect, not alienate? Instead of "it will be as I say," a parent can say, "I understand your perspective. Let's talk about it and find a solution together." This acknowledges the child's perspective as valuable and teaches the child skills of negotiation and compromise. Instead of "see how I feel now because of you," a parent can say, "I feel frustrated now. I need a moment to calm down, and then we'll talk about what happened." This shows taking responsibility for one's own emotions, while still addressing problematic behavior. Instead of "why can't you be like him or her," a parent can say, "each person has their unique strengths. One of the things I appreciate about you is your unique quality. This recognizes and celebrates the child's individuality instead of punishing it. Instead of "you are a negative label," a parent can say, "I saw that you did specific behavior. What do you think? How could you approach that situation differently next time?" This separates behavior from identity and encourages children to think critically and solve problems. Instead of "I'm doing this for your own good," a parent can say, "I'm concerned about specific concern. Can we talk about what both of us are worried about and how we can find a solution that both of us feel comfortable with?" This acknowledges legitimate concerns without resorting to control. Instead of "while you're under my roof, you'll respect my rules," a parent can say, "In our family, we have certain expectations that help us live harmoniously together. Here's why I think this rule is important." This explains the logic behind rules and connects them to shared values, instead of basing them exclusively on authority. Instead of "others have it worse than you," a parent can say, "I see that you're having a hard time now. It's okay to feel that way. How can I help you?" This validates the child's emotions and offers support instead of diminishment. Instead of "when will you finally change," a parent can say, "I notice that this happens repeatedly. I believe in your ability to find better ways to deal with this situation. How can I help you with that?" This expresses confidence in the child's ability to grow and change, while simultaneously offering support. These alternatives aren't just about the nicer words, they represent a fundamentally different approach to the parent-child relationship. They recognize the child as a person with their own thoughts, feelings, and perspectives worthy of respect. They build a connection based on collaboration and mutual respect, instead of on fear and control. These sentences, "It will be as I say, see how I feel now because of you, why can't you be like him or her?" aren't just words. They are seeds from which grow beliefs about oneself, about the world, about what we deserve and what is possible. But just as words can wound, they can also heal. They can limit, but they can also liberate. As the wise saying goes, choose your words carefully, for one day your children will speak them. For those who grew up with toxic fathers, it's important to remember, the trauma you experienced is not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. Not because you're to blame, but because you're the only one who can take steps toward healing. And you deserve that gift, the gift of understanding, forgiveness, if possible, and finally, liberation from patterns that no longer serve your well-being. For fathers who recognize some of these patterns in themselves, I want to say, recognition is the first, and perhaps most important step. The fact that you're watching this, that you're open to thinking about your parenting, already shows that you're on the path to change. No one is a perfect parent. We all come with our wounds, our blind spots, our limitations. But through conscious choice, we can break the cycle and create something new and healthy for our children. You might ask, is it too late? If my child is already grown, can I still repair the damage? The answer is, it's never too late for honesty, for an apology, for a new beginning. Relationships can be healed and transformed at any stage of life, if there is a sincere desire and commitment to that process. We all deserve relationships that nourish us, not drain us. That elevate us, not diminish us. That recognize our essence, not just our behavior. And we all have the power to create such relationships, with our children, with our parents, if that's possible and safe, and finally, with ourselves. Because perhaps the most important relationship we need to heal is the one with ourselves, with that inner child who may still be under the influence of toxic words they heard. That child deserves your love, your understanding, your compassion. And when you connect with them, you open the door to true healing and transformation. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you, share it with those for whom it might mean something. And remember, the path to healing begins with one step, the decision that you deserve more, that you deserve better, that you deserve love that doesn't hurt. Until the next video, take care.